the word that you have in a lot of your vocabulary is freedom, and that seems to be the core value that you speak about, and that you share, and that you're very
Yeah.
passionate about people acknowledging, because it seems like it's a very powerful antidote to the hijacking happening around us. And so I'd be
Yeah.
curious to see, like, how did you come to the freedom value being the highest one here?
Great question. And I think it does, have certain bedfellows like love and worth and joy and possibility. But freedom to me is sort of the container, it's the catch-all, it's the space within which all of those other beautiful qualities and characteristics of what I would say is our inherent soul nature, they belong, right? So I think freedom really was the experience that I fortuitously sort of stumbled into almost through, my own forms of adversity. In this case, it was a relationship that ended where a girl that I, at the time, as best as I knew, thought I was in love with, the sort of the puppy love that we know in our 20s. And when she left, I fell apart, which was really sort of an extension of my fear of loss, my parents having died when I was young. So she sort of represented that next value proposition, after the most precious things, my own care providers, mum and dad, had died. And so, the ripe old age of 27, 28, this woman comes into my life, and sort of those very understandable young tenderhooks got linked and attached to her as the form of love. So when she left, I sort of fell apart, and like most of my friends or anyone who's gone through a breakup, and if you struggle, it was hard. But at the end of what was about a 7 to 8 week process of my own grief, I was sitting there one day, and I had all these questions still sort of ruminating around my mind of like, where is she? Is she dating someone else? Will I see her again? Will I find love like that again? And in one foul swoop, I got the answer to all the questions, which was 3 words: I don't know. I don't know where she is. I don't know if I'll see her again. I don't know if she's dating someone. And I don't know if I'll have love like that again. And what I realized at that moment was that the very nature of life itself is uncertainty. And when you realize that the nature of how we perceive the future is usually a reflection of a history you haven't accepted yet. So I tell people, your future is not actually something you're creating, but rather remembering and then usually trying to avoid. It's a very powerful distinction. And people are like blown away just by that one statement, right? They're like, holy shit, that's all I've been doing for 30, 40 years and why I have anxiety. So we're at that moment, to come full circle to your question, I felt an experience of freedom cascade through every cell of my body that I didn't even know was possible. And that's all I could, ascribe it to, was I was just free. I was free from my own vacillations. I was free from my own superimposed worries into a future that I was completely oblivious to. And so that really set the tone sort of 26 years ago, to realize that what I feel we're all looking for is freedom. And you can give it different names, right? Relief, joy, happiness. But really it's freedom from the constraints that I assert we arrive with, which sort of fall into those buckets of some feeling of inadequacy, some feeling of insecurity, and some feeling of scarcity, right? The I'm not enoughs, or I'm not safes, or I'm not loved. All of those create an immense amount of stress, duress, and suffering. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the actual opportunity that it is to be human is to break free from those prisons, hence freedom.
Amazing. And
and thank you for coming to the show, folks.
Yeah. Well, Peter, it's, I'm thrown back. I have a friend, because I feel like this ties into what you're saying and connects it on the spiritual level. I had a friend who had created this product line of colognes, and it was tied to the chakra system, and it was like every single chakra existing, and he had eight different colognes, and it was like, wait, isn't there 7 chakras? And what he explained was like, well, yeah, but when everything is in alignment, the chakra of what this is all about is freedom. And freedom was like the top kind of 8th pillar. And as you're sharing this, it reminds me of that in the end, like freedom is almost everything that we're going for. Now, I know that I've often heard the definition between freedom from and freedom to, because there's like certain stages in life that you're trying to find freedom from, the monthly expenses that are burdening you down, or the debt that's kind of in your life. And then the freedom from all these things that you need to respond to get you to a place where you're, oh, okay, I'm above water now. And then there's kind of this freedom to being inspired or taking action. Do you make any kind of distinction that way as well? And do you have some advice that comes from one perspective or the other?
No, I mean, I do speak to that. And to me, that's how we tend to relate to time, albeit most people's relationship to time is dysfunctional, right? So freedom from is really speaking to history or our past, right? So it's the freedom from whatever has previously been weighing us down, a constraint, as you said, expenses or even traumas, memories, relationships that are actually behind us, but for the most part, because we're human, we tend to hold on to our history as evidence as to why we need to live in fear or anxiety today. So that's freedom from something that's actually expired, right? It's finished, but yet most people's history isn't behind them because it's still occupying their thought processes today. And then freedom two is more aspirational as opposed to expirational, right? So it's more we're heading towards something that occurs to us as a possibility or an opportunity. I want to have the freedom to travel to Iceland, Bali, whatever it might be. So that's aspirational. Yeah. But to me, mine is much more all encompassing. It's freedom for all of it, right? Freedom from all aspects of time and space so that I recognize my actual nature is freedom. It's not so much that Peter Crone is free, but rather I am freedom itself.
Okay. Well, hold on.
that left you stunned for a second.
Does it show? I'm trying to bring it.
Maybe it's the fatigue, but I feel as we get into
I,
this conversation, your fatigue is waning, which
a little.
typically
You know
happens.
what? I didn't even have a coffee because I was like, I don't think I'll need it for someone who
No,
is going to be a mind architect. I think they're going to be doing just
exactly.
fine.
Yeah. Work in
So
mysterious ways, my friend.
wait, so like that's a statement that makes me go like, hold up a second. But like, what does that distinction mean, and how does it change in your actions when you embody that I am freedom?
So, when you recognize that every human being by design, the actual equipment that we are collapsed with, like brain and body, right? The hardware, this meat suit that we interface each other with and then life itself, we become very, I would say, misidentified with this persona, right? Recognizing that our view of life gives our world. People think there's a world out there and that we're all looking at the same world, which is a complete misnomer. What you're looking at is your own view of the world. So now that view is very subjective, and this is why people could walk into an auditorium, somebody could be speaking, whether it be, beautiful wisdom that's spiritual, it could be sales tactics, or it could be, to do with tactical armed forces strategies. It doesn't really matter what the subject matter is. Everybody's going to have their own interpretation. For some people, it could be euphoric. For some people, it'd be confrontational. So you've got one person saying something, in this case, in this podcast, I'm saying something. For some people, they're like, holy shit, that just fucking blew my mind. For somebody else, they might be saying, I don't know who this guy is. Like, why am I listening to this? This is a waste of my time, right? So everybody's going to have their own world. Now, what that does is it gives us each this subjective view and this I. So when we go to bed at night, especially when there's these quiet times, you're driving in your car alone, you're in the shower, there's a dialogue, a narrative that we think of as ourselves. It's the voice in our head, right? And so that I is the subjective experience, or what I call the walking conversation, that we become misidentified with. So you could argue, that I does some work, attends some workshops, reads some spiritual books, maybe listens to Peter Crone or some other aspirational guests on your show, and they're like, oh my gosh, I now feel free. That's great. That's definitely an upgrade to most people who aren't free. Going back to your original question, they're tired, they're frustrated, they're under the guise of, I'm a victim of my circumstances, my boss, my job, they suck, whatever it is. That's a victim mindset. That's the antithesis of being free. So being free as an individual is certainly an upgrade to most human beings' experience of planet Earth. But when we go beyond the personal and we go into the actual experience of a characteristic, then I am freedom itself. I'm the essence of freedom. It's not so much that so it's the absence and the dissolution of the I, which is a very advanced spiritual teaching, which is hard to grasp because it's like, well, what do you mean? I can see you. There's a you there, right? So, of course, that's where language becomes limited. We need words, but at the same time, words become the obstacle to what is already there. So I can only speak to it, point to it, and then people will have the experience of it or not, right? Like there was a beautiful analogy used by Ramana Maharshi when people go to his ashram and listen to him do satsang. He would say it's as though people are walking in with gunpowder in their hand. And if they cupped their hand, some of the gunpowder for some people would be submerged in water, so it's completely saturated. And for some people, there's no water and the gunpowder is bone dry. And so for the person with whom the saturated water it's covered, the same insight could be the most powerful distinction that he shares. It won't resonate in a way that they have this huge like epiphany, but it is nonetheless slowly reducing the amount of saturation of the gunpowder. Versus a person who has dry gunpowder, they have this ignited moment of like, wow, that just changed the course of their life. It's transformational, right? So understanding those distinctions and that we all have our own views, for some people realizing, holy shit, I am freedom itself, transcends the illusion of this isolated thing that we call I. And that's just an advanced state of, truly tapping into source, capital S, versus, self, small s.
Thank you so much for listening to the Selling with Love podcast. We have some previous episodes you can tune into right here. And if you prefer the short form content where you get to the point in under 10 minutes, we do have a ton of clips from our best episodes that are being shared on this channel as well. So pick which one supports you the most. And of course, thank you for liking, subscribing, and of course, selling with love.